I'm Emily Grant, 29, and I built everything I have from the ground up after aging out of the foster system. For years, I held out hope that my parents would come back for me, or at least acknowledge I existed. But when they reappeared after 18 years, demanding a share of my $15 million lottery win, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been discarded by someone you would have done anything for? If so, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line with someone who crossed it, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about owning your worth. What I did next might surprise you. I don't remember a time when money wasn't tight. Our fridge was always close to empty by the end of the week, and I got used to eating plain rice with butter because it was cheap and filling. My parents argued about bills in the kitchen, not loudly, just constantly. My dad would sit at the table with his head in his hands, and my mom would smoke by the window, muttering numbers under her breath. Rent, electric, gas, phone, some got paid, some didn't. They weren't cruel, just overwhelmed. I think they started out with good intentions. My mom told me once that I was a surprise baby, a blessing, she said, but her voice sounded tired. I didn't ask what she meant. I was maybe 5 at the time, sitting on the floor while she clipped coupons. She gave me a pair of dull scissors and said I could help. I cut out pictures of cereal boxes and toothpaste and handed them to her like I was doing something important. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. At school, I noticed other kids had snacks with colorful wrappers and those little lunch boxes with compartments. I had whatever we had in the pantry, usually half a peanut butter sandwich and a bruised apple. If there wasn't anything at all, I said I wasn't hungry. By the time I was in 1st grade, I had figured out how to make a dollar stretch. I'd save coins I found around the house, sometimes take a few quarters from under the couch cushions or my dad's change jar. I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought of it as survival. There weren't many hugs in our house. My parents weren't the affectionate type. I don't think they ever learned how to be. They were always tired, always trying to figure out how to make ends meet. I wasn't neglected in the way some kids are. I had clothes, shoes, a bed, but everything was second-hand or patched up. I remember one winter, I wore a coat that had a broken zipper. My teacher asked if I was cold and gave me an extra sweatshirt to wear inside. I said I liked it that way. I didn't want her to feel sorry for me. The truth is, I wanted to make them proud. I didn't need toys or vacations or big gestures. I just wanted a gold star on a spelling test to make my mom smile. I wanted to bring home a drawing and have my dad put it on the fridge. But most days, they were too busy or too tired or both. My achievements were met with distracted nods or silence. Then, one afternoon, something changed. I was 6. I remember the sun coming through the living room window, the dust floating in the air. My mom sat me down and said we were going on a little trip. She said I'd be staying with some friends of theirs, just for a little while. I asked if I should pack my teddy bear. She said I wouldn't need it. I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe it was like a sleepover. But when we got there, a house I didn't recognize, a woman I'd never seen, I saw them hand over a backpack and some papers. They didn't come inside. My mom kissed the top of my head and said, "Be good." My dad kept his eyes on the ground. Then they got back in the car and drove away. I waited by the window for hours. Every time a car passed, I thought it was them. It was. The woman, I'll call her Linda, was nice enough. Her house smelled like cinnamon and cats. She showed me where I'd sleep, introduced me to the other kids. I was confused, but I didn't cry. I just kept asking when my parents were coming back. Linda didn't answer the first few times. Then she said, "Sweetheart, I think it's going to be a while." That night, I lay awake under a blanket that wasn't mine, in a room with strangers, and tried to remember the last thing my mom said to me. I think it was, "Be good." That was the last thing. Days turned into weeks. No calls, no visits. Eventually, a social worker explained that I'd be staying in the foster system. No explanation, no timeline, just a new reality. I started going to a new school, got a new toothbrush, learned to call Linda Miss Linda, and never ask for seconds unless offered. I stopped expecting them to come back. I moved homes a few times. Some were better than others. There were people who genuinely tried to care for me, and there were others who saw the monthly check and not much else. I kept my head down. I studied. I stayed out of trouble. I didn't complain. I figured if I made myself easy to care for, someone might want to keep me. No one did. But I got good grades. I worked part-time jobs as soon as I was old enough, babysitting, cashiering, mopping floors at a diner. Anything to stay independent. I saved every dollar I could. I applied for scholarships, filed my own FAFSA, and got into a state college. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I paid my way through with work study and grants. There were times I skipped meals to afford textbooks. I didn't mind. I was used to doing things alone. Sometimes, late at night, I'd Google their names, my parents, just to see. One time, I found a Facebook profile. New last name. Photos with a man I didn't recognize and a little girl who looked like she was about 10. I stared at that photo for a long time. They looked happy. I closed the tab. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building something from scratch, and that was worth more than being part of someone else's story. Still, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, if I do everything right, graduate, get a job, make a life, they'll notice. They'll come back. They'll say, "We're proud of you." But they didn't. So I stopped waiting. I finished school, got hired as a paralegal, moved into a small studio apartment and started paying down my student loans. I still budgeted like I had nothing. I clipped coupons out of habit. I checked my bank balance 3 times a day. But for the first time, I wasn't worried I'd lose everything overnight. And then one morning, I stopped at a gas station on my way to work and bought a lottery ticket. Just one. It was stupid, I'd never done it before. I scratched it off in the parking lot with a quarter. At first, I thought I'd read it wrong. But I hadn't. I just won $15 million. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the numbers, trying to feel something. But all I could think about was a little girl sitting on a stranger's couch, clutching a backpack and waiting for a ride that never came. When I was 14, I was placed with a couple who were older than the others I'd stayed with. They didn't have biological children. The wife, Denise, liked to bake and asked me about school. The husband, Ron, worked night shifts and kept the garage spotless. They weren't warm exactly, but they didn't yell, and they never made me feel like I was in the way. That was enough. One afternoon, Denise found me going through an old folder I kept tucked in the bottom drawer of my dresser. It had my birth certificate, a faded photo of me with my mom, and a piece of paper with an address on it, scribbled in pencil and nearly rubbed out from being folded so many times. She didn't ask what I was doing. She just said, "If you want to write to them, I'll mail it for you." So I did. I spent over an hour choosing the words. I didn't beg. I didn't accuse. I just said I hoped they were okay, and if they ever wanted to talk, here was where they could reach me. I included a phone number. I don't know what I expected. A postcard? A text. Weeks passed, nothing came. Denise eventually asked if I wanted to try again. I shook my head and told her it was fine. But it stuck with me. Not even a "we're sorry" or "please don't contact us." Just silence. I didn't try again. Years later, during my second year of college, a friend showed me how to look up people on social media using old addresses. I typed in my dad's name and found him right away. There he was, gray around the temples, standing in front of a barbecue grill, smiling. Beside him, my mom. She looked exactly the same, only more polished. Her hair was styled. Her clothes were new. There were pictures of family gatherings, holidays, and a little girl with dark eyes and a pink bicycle. My sister. I stared at the photo longer than I meant to. She looked like me, or maybe I just wanted her to. Her name was Lily. She had a birthday cake shaped like a castle. She had parents who showed up. I scrolled through everything. Their dog, their vacations, posts about school projects and soccer games. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, and I wasn't anywhere in those memories. No photos, no stories, no acknowledgement that I had ever existed. It wasn't that they'd hidden me. It was like they'd deleted me. One night, I sat with my laptop open, staring at the message box on my mother's profile. I typed a few words, deleted them, tried again, then I just closed the tab. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of curiosity. A few weeks later, I told my advisor at school that I wanted to change my work-study hours. She asked why, and I said I needed more shifts to cover rent. I don't think she believed me, but she approved it. I started cleaning classrooms before morning lectures. I worked, I studied, I kept to myself. Sometimes I'd wonder if they ever thought about me, not out of guilt, just curiosity. Like, "Hey, remember that kid we used to have?" But I doubted it. People like that, they don't look back. During one of my clinical internships, I was assigned to shadow a caseworker for Child Protective Services. We were reviewing a file when she paused and said, "Sometimes parents let go to survive. Doesn't make it right, just makes it real." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. After graduation, I moved to a city a few hours away and got a job at a small law firm. I was technically a legal assistant, but I did everything: filing, scheduling, scanning, research. I was good at it. I didn't mind the long hours or the silence. I liked being useful. Occasionally, my coworkers would talk about visiting their families, weekend trips, holiday plans. I always said I was staying in town to catch up on work. It wasn't a lie. I always had work. Then came the lottery. After I won, I didn't tell anyone at first. I needed time to think. I hired a financial advisor, got a lawyer, and set up everything properly. I moved out of my studio apartment and into a condo with a washer and dryer. It was the most luxurious thing I'd ever owned. I still made coffee at home, still used coupons, still bought my clothes secondhand. But people started noticing. My boss asked if I'd inherited something. I told him I'd come into a little money. He nodded like he understood. What I didn't say was that I had $15 million sitting in a trust, enough to change everything, enough to make people show up. 3 months after the win, a letter arrived. Cream envelope, embossed return address, a law office in my hometown. I opened it without thinking. Inside was a formal request. My parents were seeking what they referred to as their rightful share of my lottery winnings. The letter cited parental investment, upbringing, and moral entitlement. I read it twice. Then I set it on the counter and walked out of the room. That was the first time I felt something sharp, not sadness, not confusion, something cleaner. It wasn't enough that they'd left me. Now they wanted a cut of what I'd built without them. I didn't respond, not right away. Instead, I sat down and started searching real estate records. Something had shifted, and this time, I wasn't going to be quiet about it. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I remember because I had just gotten home from the grocery store and dropped the envelope on the counter without really looking at it. I was halfway through unpacking when I noticed the return address, a law firm I didn't recognize, back in my hometown. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, a mailing error, maybe someone else with my last name. But when I opened it, I saw my full legal name printed at the top, and below it, the phrase "formal notice of claim." The letter was typed in a tone that felt both polite and condescending. They were writing on behalf of my biological parents, referred to in the letter as Mr. and Mrs., followed by names I hadn't said out loud in years. The wording was careful, rehearsed. They acknowledged my recent financial gain, no mention of the lottery directly, but it was implied. Then came the heart of it. My parents believed they were entitled to a portion of the funds, citing their role in my early development and the financial and emotional investment made during the formative years of the child's life. I stared at those words for a long time. Formative years. They meant the first 6, the years before they left me with a stranger and drove away. The years I spent learning not to ask for too much, the years I still tried to make them proud even after they were gone. That was the first time I'd heard from them in 18 years. Not a message, not a letter, nothing on my birthdays, nothing when I graduated high school or got into college, nothing when I moved into my first apartment or got my first job or spent nights wondering if I should reach out. 18 years of silence, and the first time they spoke to me was through a lawyer. I put the letter down. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my kitchen, the bag of apples still sitting on the floor, and felt the air change. I called my lawyer the next morning. He was calm about it, almost too calm. He said I wasn't legally obligated to give them anything. He could draft a formal rejection, no problem. It would be clean and quiet. No drama. But it didn't feel quiet. It felt like something had broken open. I hadn't talked about my parents to anyone in years, not because I was hiding anything, but because there was never anything to say. I told people I aged out of the foster system, that I worked my way through college, that I got lucky with the lottery. They nodded, and we moved on. Now here they were, not in person, not with an apology, with a demand. I didn't respond right away. I needed to understand what they were really doing. I Googled the law firm. It wasn't high-end, just a local office. Family disputes, estate management, divorce. Their website looked like it hadn't been updated in a decade. Then I searched my parents. Same house, same town. Their names popped up in the local directory. I found a blurry photo of them at a community event. My mother was holding a plastic cup, smiling. My father looked older, heavier. They didn't look desperate. They looked fine. But they wanted money. They didn't say they missed me. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't offer an explanation for what happened all those years ago. They just thought they deserved a piece of it. I forwarded the letter to my financial advisor and asked him to flag anything coming from that address in the future. I told my lawyer not to respond yet. I wanted time. I didn't talk to anyone about it for a few days, not even my closest friend. Eventually, I mentioned it over dinner. She was stunned. They seriously think they're owed something. They're calling it compensation, I said. For what? Abandoning you? I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to shout, to call them, to scream into the phone, to ask them how they slept at night. But I didn't. I didn't even have their number. And even if I did, what would be the point? They knew what they'd done. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they told themselves a story, that they made a tough decision, that they did what was best for me, that they'd sacrificed. And now, 18 years later, they wanted it to pay off. I started to wonder what they were expecting. A lump sum, a check in the mail, a thank you note for abandoning me at 6 and never looking back. I thought about the little girl in the photos on their Facebook page, the one with the pink bicycle and the birthday cake, the one who got what I never did. They had made a new family, started fresh, and now that I was successful, they were circling back like it had all been part of the plan. I kept the letter on my desk for weeks. Every time I saw it, I felt that same quiet fury, not loud, not explosive, just sharp. They thought I'd feel obligated, that I'd be grateful enough for the scraps they gave me at the beginning to open my wallet now. I didn't owe them anything. I reminded myself of that every day. Eventually, I put the letter away, not in the trash, not in a drawer. I scanned it and saved it to a folder on my computer, titled it History. Then I started looking at real estate listings, not for myself. I was fine where I was. But I knew where they lived. And I had the money now to make decisions that couldn't be ignored. I didn't tell anyone right away. The letter sat on the counter, unopened after that first read, for nearly a day. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I also couldn't look at it again. I just kept glancing at the envelope like it might change. Like if I left it there long enough, it would disappear on its own. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stayed on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness either. It was something duller. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything I was feeling. There was no confrontation, no dramatic outburst, just quiet, the kind that settles into your bones. The next morning, my partner came over. We had been together a little over a year at that point. We didn't live together yet, but she kept a toothbrush in my bathroom and knew where I hid the extra set of keys. She walked in, set her bag down, and noticed the envelope before I even said a word. "You okay?" she asked. I handed her the letter without speaking. She read it standing up, shoulders tensed, lips pressed into a straight line. When she finished, she didn't ask me what I wanted to do. She didn't suggest a course of action or say anything like, "They don't deserve it." She just sat down next to me and placed her hand on my back. Warm, steady. I didn't cry. I didn't have anything left to cry about. I'd spent years pushing all that down, telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need answers or apologies. But sitting there with her hand on my back, the weight of those missing years finally settled in. I thought about the time in 4th grade when I had to borrow a pencil every single day for a week because I didn't have one, and I was too embarrassed to ask the teacher again. I remembered one Christmas where the foster parents forgot to get me anything and just said, "We thought the agency would handle it." I remembered eating cereal with water because there was no milk and trying to make it taste better by pretending I liked it that way. And through all of that, I had still held onto this quiet, ridiculous hope that maybe one day they'd come back. That they'd say, "We're sorry we had to leave. We missed you every day." I didn't need them to raise me. I just wanted them to notice I'd survived. But they didn't want that. They didn't want to get to know me. They didn't want to hear about my life. They wanted access. They wanted money. The word entitled kept echoing in my head, not just in the legal sense, in the emotional sense. They really believed they had the right to benefit from the very life they'd opted out of. For a long time, I had been holding space in my heart for them. I thought that made me generous, that if they ever came back, I'd be the bigger person, I'd listen, maybe even forgive. But now, I understood that they weren't returning to reconnect. They were returning to collect. I started to go back through moments I hadn't thought about in years. Like the time I got accepted into college and called the agency just to ask if they still had a number for my parents. I didn't even know what I would have said if they picked up. I just wanted them to know I'd done something with my life. Or when I was 19 and working nights at a gas station, and a man came in who looked just like my dad, same build, same posture, and for a second I froze, heart racing, thinking maybe, just maybe. But it wasn't him. And I felt stupid for even thinking it could be. I thought about the other kids in the homes I stayed in, how some of them had visitors, even if it was just once a month. Some had birthdays with a cake from the grocery store and people who showed up. I never said anything, but I watched, and I learned how to disappear without feeling it. Now, here they were, resurfaced like nothing had happened. As if those missing years could be erased with a signature and a wire transfer. I didn't tell many people about the letter. I didn't want to become the story. The girl who hit the jackpot and suddenly had long-lost family crawling out of the woodwork. But the truth was worse than that. They weren't long-lost. They weren't even curious. They were just opportunistic. My partner asked me later that night what I was going to do. I told her I didn't know yet. I said I wanted to think. But the truth was, I had already decided. I wasn't going to respond. Not to them, not to the lawyer, not yet. Because I didn't owe them closure. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Nothing dramatic, just information, property records, public tax info, zoning maps. It didn't take long to find the building. The one they lived in, the apartment number, the property management company. It was old, not terrible but not good either. Small units, some vacancies, outdated plumbing, but it was for sale. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to make a point. That night, I went to bed with the letter tucked inside a folder labeled Received. I wasn't angry. I was done giving them space in my life they hadn't earned. Done trying to make sense of people who only showed up when they thought I had something to give. For years, I told myself I'd let go. Now I finally had. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't give them the chance to pretend there was a relationship to repair. Instead, I forwarded the letter to my lawyer with a short note. No response needed. He replied a few hours later saying he understood and would keep an eye out for anything further. Then I closed the email and moved on to the part I actually cared about. I opened a spreadsheet I started a few days earlier, when I hadn't told anyone about. At the top, their names, the last known address, estimated income range based on available public data. I had never seen that building in person, but I knew enough about the neighborhood to guess what kind of condition it was in. Not terrible, but old, probably drafty in the winter. The kind of place where the water pressure cuts out when the upstairs neighbor turns on their shower. I called my real estate attorney and asked if she could walk me through a purchase under an LLC. She didn't ask why, just sent over the paperwork. The building was owned by a local couple who had inherited it from a relative and were looking to offload it before the end of the fiscal year. They weren't sentimental. They were just ready to be done with it. We negotiated. Quietly. I never used my real name. Everything went through the holding company, clean, efficient, completely legal. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. I was now the owner of a 16-unit building in a mid-tier suburb, old windows, outdated wiring, but solid. Fully occupied, including one unit on the third floor, leased to a married couple with a joint lease under names I'd seen once on my birth certificate. I didn't tell anyone, not even my partner. Not because I was hiding it, but because this wasn't a move I needed to explain. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was control. After years of being pushed around by systems, policies, and people who left me behind, I finally had the chance to decide the terms. New management letters went out that Friday. Plain envelopes, standard language, no flair, just an announcement that rent would now be collected through a new portal. A modest increase, about 8%, still well under market. Enough to make them notice, not enough to make them move. That wasn't the point. The point was they would see my name on the payment receipts. Not the full name, just the business name, and in the small print at the bottom, funded and held in trust by my initials management group. I debated whether to make it more obvious, but subtlety always lands harder when people realize they missed the first signs. I didn't want to evict them, I didn't want to confront them, I just wanted to flip the balance. For so long, they had held the power of silence. They had controlled the narrative simply by walking away and never explaining. Now they'd have to live in a building with my signature on the deed. Every time they logged in to pay rent, they'd be reminded. A week after the notices went out, the building manager forwarded me a message. It had come from my parents' unit. The subject line was, "Request to speak to ownership." The body of the email was short, polite, curious. I didn't reply. The next day, they tried again. This time, the message was signed, "We'd like to clarify something regarding our lease renewal." Still no mention of me, still pretending it was just business. My manager called to ask if I wanted her to handle it. "No need," I said. "They're not being evicted, they're just paying rent." She laughed, not knowing the full story, and hung up. That weekend, I walked by the building. Not close enough to be recognized, just across the street. It looked the same as the photos. Beige siding, cracked sidewalk, second-floor windows with old blinds. I saw someone pulling groceries out of a trunk. Not them, someone else. I kept walking. I didn't feel satisfaction, not really, just something heavier. Final, maybe, like putting down a box I didn't realize I'd been carrying for too long. They hadn't reached out since, not directly anyway, but the lawyer who'd sent the original letter followed up. A short email this time. My clients would still appreciate a response regarding their inquiry. I forwarded it to my own attorney with a note. Still no response. He replied, "Understood." A few days later, my partner noticed something was different. Not in a dramatic way, just that I seemed less preoccupied, more present. "You okay?" she asked one night while we were cooking. "Yeah," I said. "I finally closed something." She didn't push. She just nodded and kept stirring the pasta. I didn't need to explain that I had rewritten the ending of a story that had haunted me since I was 6. That, for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be acknowledged or chosen. I had already chosen myself. And now, the people who once said they couldn't afford to keep me would spend every month paying rent to the child they left behind. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. And rent was due on Monday. The first sign that they were starting to feel it came about 2 weeks after the rent notices went out. My building manager forwarded me an email from their unit. It wasn't hostile, just wordy. My mother had written it, or at least signed it. It was the kind of message you write when you're trying to sound composed but can't quite hide the edge underneath. She mentioned the unexpected increase, said it was not in line with previous practices, and requested that the current rate be reconsidered based on the tenant's long-term occupancy and reliable payment history. It was signed, "With respect, M and G last name." I read it 3 times before forwarding it to my lawyer with one sentence, "No response." The next day, 2 other tenants emailed in with nearly identical wording, clearly copied and pasted. That told me they'd been going door to door, trying to stir something up. They probably thought they were organizing a mini rebellion against the new landlord. What they didn't realize was that I'd already reviewed the lease agreements myself. The increase was legal, modest, and well within the limits. The building needed updates, and I had already started getting quotes on plumbing and electrical work. It wasn't about them, it just included them. Then, about a week later, the old owner, Marcy, called me. She was polite, a little amused. "So, your tenants on the 3rd floor reached out to me directly," she said. "Wanted to know if I still had any say in the rent." I asked her what she told them. I said, "I sold the building, and I work for the new owner now. If you've got an issue, you'll need to bring it up through the proper channel." I thanked her and ended the call. That same afternoon, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was unmistakable. "I don't know why you're doing this," my father said. "We're your parents. We thought you'd want to help. If you could call us back, we'd appreciate it." He sounded tired, not angry, just worn down. There was a pause and then he added, "We're not trying to fight you." I listened to it twice, then I deleted it. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since I was 6 years old, and I barely recognized it. It had lost the sharpness I remembered. Now it was hushed, uncertain, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be calling. He didn't. I didn't tell my partner about the voicemail. I didn't bring it up with anyone. There was no part of me that wanted to analyze it. The words weren't complicated. They just didn't mean anything anymore. I wasn't doing this to make them suffer. I hadn't gone out of my way to punish them. I hadn't raised the rent to an impossible amount. I hadn't singled them out. What I had done was stop playing along with the idea that they could drop in and claim space in my life without earning it. I hadn't invited them. I hadn't provoked them. They found out about the money and came knocking with open palms. That was their choice. Mine was simply to stop, pretending we were ever a family. They paid the new rent. It was late the first month, but it came. The payment was routed through the system like everyone else's, no personal notes, no messages, just a transaction. A few months went by. The complaints stopped. So did the attempts at contact. I think they finally understood that I wasn't going to respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. In the meantime, I kept moving. I started investing more seriously. Not just real estate, small businesses, a few startups, even a nonprofit that helped former foster youth with housing. I donated quietly. No press, no names on plaques, just money where it was needed. One day, I got a letter in the mail from a girl who had aged out of the system like I had. She didn't know me, but the nonprofit had passed along her note. She thanked me for the laptop she received through the tech grant I'd helped fund. Said it was the first thing she'd ever owned that wasn't secondhand. I kept that letter. It reminded me that not everything has to be loud to matter. My partner and I moved into a new place that spring. It wasn't huge, but it had light and space and a little garden in the back. We didn't make a big announcement. We just packed our things, hired movers, and made the change. Some nights we'd sit outside with drinks and talk about the next chapter. A foundation, maybe, something long-term, something solid. The thing people don't tell you about cutting ties is that it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet. Clean, you stop picking up the rope. You stop waiting for the apology that won't come. You stop asking why. They stopped contacting me after the voicemail. I think they knew I'd heard it. Maybe that was all they needed to feel like they'd been heard, but they weren't owed more than that. I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I already had it. About 6 months after I bought the building, the letters stopped. The calls had already stopped by then, and the emails too. Rent was being paid on time, no more complaints filed. It was as if we'd silently agreed to stop pretending anything else existed between us. I didn't expect anything more. I wasn't holding my breath for an apology. So when the envelope arrived, cream-colored, handwritten, no return address but postmarked from their city, I stood with it in my hands for a long time. I recognized the handwriting right away. My mother S. Neat, careful cursive, the kind she used to label my school folders with. I don't know what made her write it or why it came now. I hadn't made any new moves. I hadn't changed the rent. I hadn't reached out, but here it was. I opened it alone, sitting at the kitchen table. It was a single sheet of stationery, no greeting, no date. She wrote that she hoped I was well, that she and my father were managing, that things had been challenging lately. Then she shifted tone, a little softer, less formal. She said she had heard about what I'd done with the building, that she understood now that I hadn't responded out of cruelty. That maybe, she wrote, this was how people protect themselves when they've been hurt. And then, one line that stopped me cold. I'm sorry for how hard things must have been. It wasn't much, not a confession, not an explanation, but it was the first time she had ever acknowledged anything. She didn't mention the letter from the lawyer. She didn't say the word abandoned. But for her, I could tell this was as close as she'd ever get to naming it. I sat with the letter for a while. I didn't feel what I thought I might, not relief, not closure, just quiet. It wasn't a clean apology. It wasn't enough to undo anything, but it was something, and that mattered more than I expected it to. I waited a few days before deciding to respond. I kept it short, 1 page. I told her I appreciated her letter. I told her I was doing well. I didn't pretend there wasn't a wound. I didn't try to rewrite the past. I said I wasn't interested in reopening anything that couldn't be repaired, but I left a small door open. I told her if she wanted to talk, we could meet once. One conversation, in person, neutral ground, a coffee shop. I gave a date and time, nothing dramatic, just a Tuesday morning in the middle of the month. I said if she didn't show up, I'd understand. I wouldn't follow up. This wasn't a test. It was an option. Then I mailed it. And I waited. Tuesday came, I arrived early. I picked a table in the corner, ordered a drink, and kept my phone on silent. I didn't bring a book or any work. I just sat there, watching the door. She didn't come. After 30 minutes, I left. I didn't feel disappointed. Just, still, I'd done what I needed to do. I'd given her the opportunity. Whatever she chose was hers to carry. I never got a reply. No follow-up letter, no message, no missed call, just silence, again. But this time, it didn't sting. I told my partner about it that evening. She asked me how I felt, and I said, like I closed the loop. Because I'd spent most of my life thinking that some part of me needed fixing in order to be loved by them. That if I worked harder, proved myself, became someone impressive, maybe they'd come back and say, "You mattered. We see you." But they didn't, and I became someone anyway. This wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about closure. It was about choice. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was deciding the terms. And I had decided to allow one honest conversation, nothing more. I'd made that offer from a place of strength, not hope. She didn't take it, that was her choice. And it told me everything I needed to know. The next time I walked by the building, it was spring. The hedges had been trimmed, the siding was being pressure washed. The repairs I'd authorized were nearly complete. It didn't look shiny or new, but it looked cared for. I stopped across the street for a moment. Watched a delivery driver carry groceries up the stairs. I wondered briefly if they were home, if they ever thought about calling again. But I didn't stay long. I had somewhere else to be. It's been 3 years. Longer, if you count the years I spent waiting for something that was never coming. But 3 since the letter. 3 since the voicemail. 3 since I bought the building they lived in and quietly folded their lives into mine, not to watch them struggle, but to stop letting them write the story. The rent comes in every month. Sometimes early, sometimes not, but it comes. No notes, no complaints, just numbers on a screen, another deposit, another reminder. I don't check the names anymore when the payments hit. I know the unit, I know the amount. That's enough. The building's been renovated since then, nothing flashy, just what needed fixing. The roof was replaced last year, the water pressure's better. I hired a new property manager who sends quarterly reports. We keep everything tight, repairs logged, invoices processed. I don't involve myself much now. That was never the point. I don't think about them often, not in the way I used to. Back then, they were the shadow behind everything. Every milestone I reached, every step forward, I felt their absence like a gap I couldn't close. Now, they're just 2 names on a lease. My partner and I got married last fall. We kept it small. Backyard, 20 people, string lights, catered tacos. My foster mom from my last placement came. She cried during the ceremony. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. That meant more than any speech. We didn't send invites to anyone who hadn't earned a seat. People still ask me about the lottery sometimes. Friends, acquaintances, people who heard about it and want to know what I did with all that money. I usually just say, I made it quiet. Because that's what I wanted. Not yachts, not headlines, just freedom, to not have to ask permission, to say no without fear, to walk away when something wasn't good for me. I bought 3 other properties after the first one, not big ones, mixed use mostly, retail on the bottom, apartments on top. One of them houses a tutoring center now. The woman who runs it used to be in the system, too. I helped her get the lease. No one else would give her a shot with her credit. She doesn't know the full story behind the trust that funded the loan, just that someone believed in her. That's enough. A few months ago, I met a girl through the nonprofit I've been funding. She's 17, about to age out. She reminds me of me at that age. Quiet, smart, suspicious of kindness. I've been mentoring her casually, nothing official, just someone she can text when she's overwhelmed. Someone who knows how to fill out a FAFSA without Googling it. Someone who understands the sound of a too quiet house. She asked me once, "Why do you help people like us?" I told her the truth. Because someone should have helped me. That's the legacy I care about. Not the money, not the title, not proving anything to the people who left. They taught me something, even if they didn't mean to. They taught me what it feels like to be expendable, what it means to survive in the absence of love, and what happens when you stop waiting to be saved. They left me with nothing but a lesson. I turned it into a life. When I walk past the building now, I don't cross the street. I don't look away. I just pass by like any other landlord, like someone who did the work and made peace with what couldn't be fixed. I still live modestly. Not because I have to, because it's who I am. I drive a used car. I wear the same coat I bought 5 winters ago. My wedding ring isn't flashy. It's gold, simple, solid. People assume wealth means extravagance. They expect evidence, trips, upgrades, excess. But I've learned that wealth is mostly about what you no longer need, what you're no longer willing to chase or tolerate. I don't check their social media anymore. I stopped after the wedding. There's nothing there I need. No version of them that could offer me something I haven't already built for myself. Sometimes I wonder if they know, not just about the building, but about the rest. The life I have now, the people in it, the impact I'm making. I wonder if they ever talk about me, if they ever say, "She's done well for herself," like it just happened. But I don't linger there long. That part of the story is theirs to carry. I have a different one now. Every first of the month, the rent comes in. And when it does, I take a breath. Not out of spite, not out of triumph. Just a steady, quiet reminder of how far I've come. They made a choice, I made one too. And rent is due Monday. It always is. Thanks for listening to my story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone try to come back into your life only after you found success? Did you let them in or close the door for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose peace over people, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. More true stories coming soon.